What training camp battle are we the most excited to see out in Oxnard? All that and so much more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your
Locked
daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on
Cowboys.
Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. He is Landon McCool, back from his nice vacation, back in the studio. Landon, what's going on today, sir?
Not much. Marcus knows this, but the rest of y'all are going to find out right now. I literally walked in the door a second ago from traveling, seeing family. So I'm excited to kind of get back on track for at least for a couple of days, and then yeah, I mean just kind of get back on talking Cowboys because it's been a little while since last week, and even though not much is happening, we're getting so close to training camp. Yeah. That a lot of the storylines started getting a lot more interesting, and there is some news out there to discuss. So I'm happy to be back.
Landon, the Cowboys have training camp practices later this month.
Oh God, yes, I know. I'm excited. It's one of those things where my month has been packed full of stuff, and every time I kind of am looking at the schedule, the relief inside is at the end of the month. It's the annual pilgrimage up to Oxnard to look at practice. So I'm certainly excited about that.
Yeah. All right. Let's go ahead and get into your Twitter questions. The first one comes from Zach. Excuse me. What training camp battle are you the most looking forward to out in Oxnard? I'll say for me, Landon, it's really the defensive line. Like I want to see Dorrance Armstrong versus Chauncey Golston, and I know with like defensive ends, it's not really so much a battle because they get all these guys on the field. But I want to see. Does somebody grab one of those starting defensive end spots? Does Dante Fowler look really good? Does Golston play more on the inside? I think that's where a lot of my attention will be. What about for you?
I mean, kind of shifting the tone of the question, I guess. I think it's going to be really interesting in general. And this may not be training camp battle in the sense that they meant it, but I think it's going to be interesting in general, just watching the offensive tackles and the defensive ends just verse each other. Because, I think obviously you have an idea of what you have in Tyron Smith, at least as in terms of quality, right? So you know what you have there. I think with Terrence Steele, you feel pretty confident that you've got a solid right tackle. We don't really know how much he's advanced, in the offseason. So seeing that will be exciting. And then pairing all of those guys against a lot of unknown at the defensive end position. Obviously, Parsons is what Parsons is. We all expect him to have a huge impact on this defense. Lawrence back from for another season. This one being one of the first, I think, in a couple, probably 4 or 5 years, right? That he hasn't had an offseason surgery or recovering from something, or, he's got a full offseason. So seeing a refreshed Marcus Lawrence is going to be interesting. And then obviously, as you mentioned, Armstrong and some of these other guys, and obviously Sam Williams, Golson, all these guys against these offensive tackles. And then obviously Tyler Smith getting some type snaps at offensive tackle as well. So I think, the questioner probably meant, which position group internally battling. But I think if you're talking about just internally a battle, I really think that the offensive tackles and the defense versus the defensive ends in one-on-one situations is going to be very telling this year.
Yeah. I mean, we're such line junkies that we want to just see all those guys. We want to see Tyler Smith. We want to see Golston. We want to see what Sam Williams looks like. But how about some other ones? How about receiver? Because that's one that we really don't know, because we obviously CeeDee Lamb's the number one, Gallup's the number two. We're assuming that Jalen Tolbert's going to kind of fill that number 3 role, but I want to see everybody else. What does James Washington look like outside of the disaster zone that was Pittsburgh over the last couple of years? What does TJ Vasher look like, who's had a good OTA and good summer so far? What about Simi Fehoko? I'm really interested in wide receivers 4 through 7 for the Cowboys as well.
Yeah, obviously wide receiver is a position that everyone's going to have their eye on because of the loss of Cooper and because there's just a lot of unknown there, including the depth chart. But yeah, I think you mentioned it. It's not even just the Tolberts of the world. It's the Washingtons. What can they contribute? What are we going to get from a TJ Vasher? Can he make a 53-man roster and have a role in this team? What does that mean for Simi Fehoko and his development?
Sounds like he's maybe ahead of Fajoku right now, which is a little surprising, I guess.
Like I said, I think the thing about Vasher is that if he, when you're kind of a physical specimen and you have unique traits, like there's a
Yes.
certain threshold that if you can meet it, like you have an advantage on some of these other guys who are kind of, not middling athletes. Not that Simi Fajoku is a bad athlete or anything, but I think Vasher has got a part of his game, an element of his game that's unique. And that can be easily leveraged. So if he can find a way to kind of do the normal day-to-day stuff that wide receivers have to do, as well as someone like Simi Fajoku, he may have a leg up, even though Fajoku was the drafted player, simply because he has, what we call that trump card or whatever you want to call it.
He's just more unique, right?
Yeah, exactly. He's got that ability to be a red zone player and a jump ball player that you don't really have a lot of on the rest of the team. So I think it will be interesting to see exactly how that lineup, that stack goes for the wide receivers.
I actually have a few more positional battles that I want to talk about, but we'll get into those in just a second. But before we do that, I want to tell you guys about our old friends at Bet Online. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including MLB. We've got golf going on, big UFC card here in a couple weeks. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And betonline.net remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Landon, next question. This one from August. He wants to know, how would you like to see the Cowboys handle the running back room going into the 2023 season? So this is a really interesting question. Tony Pollard entering the final year of his contract. This is the last year of Ezekiel Elliott's guaranteed money. He'll turn 28 next year. The Cowboys could save just under $5 million if they cut him. It would be about $11.9 million in dead cap money that they would have if they cut him. But what would you like to see the Cowboys do?
I think it's tough. I mean, I don't know that. Obviously the contract is tenable. And I think that
it's the first time it's been. I mean, the first time you could actually move on from him.
Yep.
Somewhat realistically.
It's finally kind of gotten to a point where the threshold, where it has any kind of positive consequence of getting rid of him. You're going to hate me for this. I actually think you should try to maybe sign him to a short extension and use some of that money, spread it out a little bit. I think look.
You said Tony Pollard or Ezekiel Elliott?
We're talking about Zeke?
Well, I'm talking about both. How would you just handle the running back room in general?
Well, in general, yeah. I would see if you could. I would see what Zeke's interested in doing. Because honestly, like you could easily cut him. You could easily just say, okay, sorry, Zeke. The money's gotten to the point where it's not tenable anymore, and it's just we save too much there. And you could do it that way. I think the other option you could talk to him is approach him. He clearly likes playing here. He likes playing with Dak. He lives with Dallas. His career, he's what is he, 28, 27?
I think he'll be going into his 27th season this year. So he'd be 28 in 2023.
So he's not reached the end of his career yet, but he's reaching the kind of tail end of certainly of what would be effectiveness, right?
Yeah.
And I think you approach him and say, hey, like, how would you feel about maybe doing a short extension? We could spread some of this money out, make the cap a lot more tenable. You could stick around from Dallas. You've been paid a lot of money by Dallas. Of course he may want to go out and try to get another payday. I don't know how likely that is. But if you could do something like that, then maybe what you could do is turn around and start negotiating with Tony Pollard and see what you want to do there. I think with Pollard, you need to decide what his role is. Like because if you're going to play him as a running back only, and if that's the case, I don't have any interest in necessarily re-signing him. I like Tony Pollard a ton.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that it falls under the same sort of situation where you shouldn't be re-signing these guys. Yeah. So you could find someone who could potentially be an explosive player that you might be able to give you kind of similar production eventually out of college and in the draft. But if you're actually interested in playing him in kind of a unique way and actually fully leveraging his skill set, I think you approach him. you kind of figure out. I think that the hardest part there is actually figuring out what the contract looks like, because there isn't a ton of examples of, if they do leverage him kind of in a more pass receiving role, what's the standard there? What's the mark of, what's the I'm struggling to find the words. What's the bar for that kind of player? What's the going price for a running back who you also are leveraging a lot as a receiver? Kind of a positionless player. I mean, we're going to see what Deebo Samuel does with San Francisco.
Well, that's the high end, right? So, like, an example would be like Cordero Patterson this offseason with the Falcons, who kind of plays that hybrid role. Sure. 2 years, $10.5 million.
I'm on board with something like that. Give me that plus maybe a little bit more. And I don't know if he's on board with that, because maybe he views himself as a more valuable player than that.
And that's the tricky thing, right?
Yeah. So, and I think that, again, it's tricky already, and then it's made more complicated by the fact that he's going to be kind of positionless. So, he may ask for kind of more wide receiver money, saying, "Hey, you're leveraging me more as a wide receiver." So, I think that, look, and this all kind of fits together, right? So, I do think that it makes a lot of sense to cut Zeke because of the money. I think it also you could find a way to make it sense to Zeke to maybe extend him, understand that his role is probably going to change, maybe because you want to give Pollard more touches, and then you go approach Pollard and see, hey, what are you looking at? We've got like all these guys. We do have a ton of money, but we also have all these guys that we need to sign, and that's kind of why you have all this money. So I think you've saved yourself enough money at this point that it's worth kicking the tires. But I just don't know what the outcome is going to become, because it's just the price there's too many variables.
All right, so I got lots of thoughts on this one. So here's what I don't want the Cowboys to do. I don't want the Cowboys to pay Tony Pollard and then see the exact same split in touches that we saw last year. That does anybody good. You're just paying for the same production. It's just much more expensive than it was over the last couple of years.
Agreed.
I almost feel like if you're going to pay Tony Pollard, you pay him now and you let him be the lead back, right? And you say, hey, Zeke, you're going to transition more into the Mark Ingram closer, short yardage running back role. And this is our Alvin Kamara, who we're getting the ball 250 times this season. We're not quite sure how we're going to do it yet, whether it's going to be as a running back or as a receiver, but he's our main guy. I don't get the sense that's what the Cowboys are going to do yet, because I still think they value Zeke. But I also don't think, Landon, they want to go into the 2023 offseason losing both these guys. It seems pretty unlikely to me that the Cowboys let Pollard walk and they let Ezekiel Elliott walk as well, or they cut him. So I am not opposed to the Cowboys doing a deal like they did similarly with DeMarcus Lawrence, right? Where there's no guaranteed money left in the deal. We're going to guarantee him his salary over the next 2 years, not add any additional money into it. Just, we give him more guaranteed money, but it also saves us some cap space. I think you could do that, and that would make a lot of sense to me, right? Because that way you could get out of his contract after, let's say, the 2024 season, and there's no dead money left. I think that makes a lot of sense.
I think Zeke would go for it too.
And I think he would too, right?
I mean, as much as people want to hate on him, specifically people on this podcast,
I will say it depends on what he does this year. Like, if he just looks completely broken down and it's clear that he doesn't have it anymore, you don't entertain that. But if he's the same player that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years, I think that's where that conversation happens.
If he looks more like he did in the first half of the season last year before the PCL injury, sign me up for that, man. And I think he might be willing to do it too, for all the reasons that we mentioned before.
Speaking of Tony Pollard's value, just a little bit. Here's a couple contracts that have been handed out over the last 2 years that he should at least keep an eye on. So we mentioned Cordero Patterson at $5.5 million a year. Chase Edmonds got $6 million a year, kind of as that running back / receiver in the Cardinals offense. Nyheim Hines for the Colts, who is the number 2 running back there, got $6 million. And then if you're looking at like the top end, like Aaron Jones, who does a lot of receiving work for the Packers, he got $12 million. His value is probably somewhere between $6 to $12 million. This season will tell you a lot, whether it's closer to that $6 million range or closer to that $12 million range. As much as I love Pollard, probably not giving him anything more than $6 or $7 million a year.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on. I mean, again, this is why this is hard to guess, because I think it really depends on how they're willing to use him, and if they're willing to use him where he's going to get a whole bunch of touches, including a whole bunch of receiving touches, I may be willing to go $8 or $9 million. But I think that if the idea is that he's going to get 10 more catches than he did last year, and the same amount of running touches, like that's not necessarily worth the money,
Right.
So I think that there's a lot of circumstance and particulars here that we kind of have to see play out a little bit before we're going to be able to really have a good call on this.
I also wouldn't be opposed to the Cowboys. Listen, if they wanted to sign Tony Pollard because they think he's an elite offensive weapon that can be used as a receiver, you do that, you save, let's say you pay him $9 million a year, whatever. And then you draft somebody in the 3rd or 4th round to kind of be the banger between the tackles. I could see them going that direction as well. Wouldn't be my preferred option, but they're just not going to go. I'm telling you right now, they're not going into the 2023 season with neither Pollard or Elliott on the roster. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, and it makes sense too with all the stuff that we've been talking about. It really feels like they're trying to gear up for a 2023 run because, just by reading tea leaves, I don't think that they're going to hang themselves by not having a solid running back going into the season. Yeah. Even just a rookie running back, even if they drafted a 1st round running back, which they shouldn't, but even if they did, well, look, if they drafted a back end of the 1st round running back when they had no running backs, I wouldn't blame them for that. But at the same time,
I don't know if I could do it again. I don't know. It was once was too much.
Number 4 overall is not the same thing as drafting a running back at 24 or 25, right? Like,
what was the Felix Jones spot, right? 24.
Well, the problem was Felix Jones, not the draft pick.
Well,
so
we're getting into
but maybe that's your point. So, look, I'm not. And let me be further clear. I'm not endorsing that necessarily.
Yeah,
I can understand it. But
I think second round is the range. Like if you told me the Cowboys traded up to 43 to grab a running back, okay, I can get behind that. You're getting 4 years of a rookie contract, and the way the running back drafting has been over the last couple of years, that's a lot of times where the first running back is being selected, right? I think Breece Hall was like 39 or something this year. That I'm in favor of.
But we both can agree that we don't necessarily want to do that with no running backs on the roster, though, right? Like, yes, I would rather have Pollard or Zeke on the roster and then draft a 2nd round running back for the future, not necessarily place all the eggs in the basket of a 2nd round running back. So,
not by themselves. It's too much.
Not by themselves. Yeah. And I think that's really where we agree wholeheartedly, is that one of these two guys is coming back, if not both.
Yeah. All right, let's take one more quick break to tell you guys about our old friends at Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock up on all the parts you need. Rock Auto has everything from engine control modules, brake parts, motor oil, and even new carpet. Whether it's for your classic or your daily driver, get everything you need in a few easy clicks delivered directly to your door. Best of all, prices at rockauto.com are always reliably low. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in the How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. All right, Landon, let's get into a couple more questions. This one from Drew. Are there any undrafted free agents that have a chance to crack the 53-man roster? We've talked about a lot of these guys, but is there one that you think has the best chance to make it?
I'm sorry, which guys?
Of the UDFAs that the Cowboys signed this year.
I think a couple of these wide receivers, if they really showed out, like if the Drummond kid really showed out, I just think there's a lot of chaos at the back end of the roster at wide receiver. That could definitely be a spot.
I would say
linebacker, right?
Hansford. He's a good one. I was going to mention Marquise Bell, the safety the Cowboys signed, who they gave a ton of guaranteed money to. And I was actually going to mention him in training camp battles because I want to see who kind of grabs that last box defender spot, whether it's Tyler Coyle, maybe it's Israel Makamu, maybe it's Marquise Bell, maybe it's John Thomas, right? The safety from Georgia Tech, who the Cowboys signed. Maybe it's Harper, the linebacker the
Mhm.
Cowboys drafted from Oklahoma State. One of those guys is going to have a really good camp. It's going to solidify their spot on the roster. That's kind of one of the lower down on the positions or down on the totem pole spots. I'm really curious to watch.
Bell's gonna have a Cowboys jersey on him. I feel very, very confidently.
Yeah.
Whether it's on the practice squad or on, the 53-man roster, that remains to be seen. But the amount of money that they gave him and how much they're already talking about him and how much they love to use those kind of, Javon Curse players.
Hmm.
I think that those I said Javon, Jaron Curse kind of players, I think that he's a lock to make the team, in one form or another. Now, like I said, is that guaranteed money going to turn into his practice squad salary, or is that just a stepping stone to him being on the 53-man roster? Or that remains to be seen in camp. But I do think he's clearly the kind of front runner just based on money. And then Hainsford, as we mentioned before, another kind of linebacker box guy. I think those are all spots, because ultimately those guys are going to be playing a lot of special teams, right? Down roster linebackers and safeties. So getting those guys from college directly and them being undrafted free agents, that's an excellent use of resources. I think that makes a lot of sense. The other guys who are going to come out and take the spots would be Lidstrom or the other center for BYU. I think Impey. Depending on where they're playing, right? Impey may be a guard or however. I think they've been moving these guys around a little bit. There's some spots there, I think, or there's some opportunity there for those guys to kind of really come in and take that job if they have a good training camp. Outside of that, I think that you kind of have a good grasp on the depth chart. So it would really require someone kind of really showing up on the scene and really having an incredible training camp, I think, to kind of find another foothold for a UDFA to make this roster.
I'll give you one more. Peyton Hendershot, a tight end from Indiana.
Yeah. Okay.
We know that we know that Dalton Schultz is the tight end 1 on this team. Jake Ferguson's probably going to work as the tight end 2, tight end 3. They brought back Jeremy Sprinkle as that blocking tight end. I don't think it's unrealistic to think Peyton Hendershot could beat out Sean McEwen and make the roster, right?
You don't think it's
I'm just saying, as much as I love Sean McEwen, Peyton Hendershot would have been a draftable tight end if it weren't for some off the field stuff. And very talented player that the Cowboys gave quite a bit of money to.
It's true.
We'll see. It wouldn't shock me if the Cowboys decided to hold on to him.
No, I would definitely put him, in that list of guys that could come in and have a great training camp. And again, maybe not the same way at center or even at wide receiver, but there is a soft spot in the roster and down roster tight ends. So, and those guys play, whether it's special teams or in blocking formations, the Cowboys use a lot of tight ends. So I wouldn't be shocked if Hendershot came in here and really played well and grabbed one of those spots.
And it's not even entirely impossible that he comes in and just outperforms Jake Ferguson, because when you get to day 3 of the draft, there's really not a lot of difference between a 4th-round tight end and a UDFA tight end. And if Hendershot's just a better receiver and more dynamic after the catch, maybe they just decide to keep both. And it's Hendershot who's playing this year over Jake Ferguson some more. Not predicting that, but again, after the top 100 picks, things get kind of wild. So
absolutely
keep an eye on him. Last question. This is a really, really good one. Sorry, I lost it. It was from @Pfizer He wants to know, what does Dak have to do to go from top 10 quarterback to top 5?
I think that's Pfizer Soze, which is a great handle if that's what it is. Is that what it says?
Pfizer Soze, yes. I lost it real quick. I couldn't see the
that's Twitter hilarious. Handle. Really good Twitter handle. Health is the first thing, honestly. I think you saw a guy that when he was healthy last year, he was incredible. Like the Cowboys were, had the number 1 offense last year. Mm-hmm. So I think health is the first step. And then, taking kind of another positive step. If we want to talk about specifics that I feel like Dak could work on, gathering his feet when he's moved them and before he throws the football. That's been an issue at times, especially later in the season when his feet just weren't as quick because of the ankle injury. He struggled to kind of get his feet properly with look, how many times have we said it, guys? When Dak struggles, it's because his feet aren't right, When Dak doesn't throw the ball accurately, it's because his feet aren't right. So any opportunity to get his feet right, or to kind of, make sure that he has his feet with it underneath him when he throws, that's going to be an opportunity for improvement from last year. And again, health is a big part of that, but I also think repetition can, not falling into bad habits when under duress. I think those are going to add to it. I think health will be a huge factor here to help the feet thing. But I think that is something that he's, always struggled with. And the more he can reduce that, the more just kind of overall positive play I think you'll see from Dak.
I agree. Now, like statistically, for me, what I'd like to see is fewer of the games where he just doesn't have it or he plays poorly. Like last year, there were 6 games in which he averaged under 6 yards per attempt. It's not awful. We saw somebody like Josh Allen. I think Josh Allen had 9 of those games last year. But we know Dak can be fantastic and as good as any quarterback in the league in a single game. If you could just kind of eliminate the stinkers, right? The 2 or 3 games where he just doesn't play well, the Denver game or the Washington game last year, the first Washington game, at Washington, you eliminate those, all of a sudden you're going to be considered a top 5 quarterback, because that's really the difference between a top 10 and a top 5 guys. Aaron Rodgers might have one of those games a year where he just plays poorly. Dak might have 4. That's it. That's the only difference.
I think one thing where Kellen can really help him, and I think Kellen needs to improve, and I think Dak needs to improve because of it's all tied together. They need to do a better job of starting out stronger. There's too many times when they come into games and it feels like it takes Dak a little while to get going, and then Dak is so good that he ends up pulling it out anyways because he plays so good in the second, third, and fourth quarter that the first quarter didn't matter. But there are too many good teams out there that will find ways to take advantage of that. San Francisco, hello. That if you can't start early, if you can't put, look, the whole point of that offense last year was to put these defenses in disadvantageous spots and their other team's offense by scoring points early. And the Cowboys really, despite having the ability to do almost anything on offense at certain points last year, they really struggled to consistently put points on the board early in every game. And when they had to kind of allow teams to hang around, that's where they started to get into some trouble. So I think whether it's Kellen Moore with play calling and maybe his scripting of the first few plays, or it's Dak just needing to get into the game earlier, I think there is lots of area of improvement in kind of how this team starts offensively.
I don't disagree. All right, that is it for today's show. I think tomorrow, Landon, we've got so many questions that we should just double back and finish up some of these. You guys had some really good ones, and then we'll get into some more of our positional previews later this week. But want to let you guys know that you should check out the Locked On NFL podcast. Our national NFL experts and insiders keep fans dialed in with the biggest stories and the latest news from around the league, because an offseason doesn't equal a break in the action. Even last week, we got some big news about Terry McLaurin's contract, which could potentially have an impact on the Cowboys down the road. They talked about all that last week, so go check it out. Make sure you're checking out the Locked On Cowboys podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We know that you are because you're listening to us right now. Follow us on YouTube. You can check out the show on Twitter at Locked On Cowboys. You can follow Landon at McCoolBCB. I am at Marcus _Mosher. And we'll see you guys right back here tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.